The lunch rush at Bellini's had finally ended, leaving Maddie exhausted as she leaned against the kitchen wall for just a moment's rest. Her feet ached in the mandatory black shoes that were a size too small. She hadn't been able to afford new ones yet. She quickly tucked a strand of dark hair back into her tight bun and straightened her crisp white shirt before pushing through the swinging doors, tray in hand. More sparkling water for table 12, she whispered to herself, navigating between the white-clothed tables where Manhattan's elite lingered over business lunches. Bellini's wasn't just any restaurant. It was where Wall Street executives closed million-dollar deals, where Broadway producers discovered new talent, and where the wealthy came to be seen. The tips were good, which was the only reason Maddie had stayed for 3 years now. Each dollar she earned went straight to her mother's medical bills or the tiny apartment they shared in Queens. What none of these people knew, not her boss, not her co-workers, and certainly not the customers who rarely looked her in the eye, was that Maddie Romano had once been destined for a very different life. "Your water, sir?" she said softly, refilling the crystal glass of a man who continued his conversation without acknowledging her. His companion, a woman with diamonds that probably cost more than Maddie's yearly salary, laughed too loudly at whatever he was saying. 6 years ago, Maddie had walked the halls of the prestigious Juilliard School with a full scholarship. Her fingers had danced across piano keys since she was 4 years old, when her mother, a cleaning lady at a music school, had brought home an old keyboard someone had thrown away. Even on that broken instrument with several keys that didn't work, Maddie had shown remarkable talent. Her high school music teacher had helped her prepare for auditions, staying late after school every day for months. When the acceptance letter came with a full scholarship offer, Maddie had cried with joy. Her mother had thrown a small party with dollar store decorations and a homemade cake. They'd believed everything was about to change, and it had changed, just not in the way they'd hoped. "Table 16 needs their check," barked Paolo, the floor manager, as he brushed past her, "and smile more. These people don't pay to see your problems." Maddie nodded and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd learned to wear a mask here, the pleasant, invisible server who anticipated needs before they were voiced. During her second semester at Juilliard, her mother had collapsed while cleaning an office building late at night. The diagnosis had come quickly, aggressive lymphoma. The scholarship covered Maddie's education, but not her living expenses or her mother's mounting medical bills. She'd tried to balance school and 2 jobs, sleeping only a few hours each night, but after her professor found her dozing during a master class, the reality became clear. She would have to choose. "Here you are, sir. Thank you for dining with us today," Maddie said, placing the leather-bound check holder on the table with practiced precision. The man barely glanced up from his phone as he handed her his credit card. As she processed the payment at the terminal, Maddie's mind drifted to what awaited her after her shift ended at 4 p.m. Unlike her co-workers who would head to happy hours or home to families, she would board the subway to the community center in her neighborhood. There, in a small room with a donated upright piano that was perpetually out of tune, she would practice until the janitor kindly told her they were closing at 9 p.m. She never missed a day. Not when she was sick, not during blizzards, not even on her birthday. The piano was her lifeline, the only thing that kept her connected to the person she was meant to be. "Order up for table 20, called the kitchen staff, pulling her back to reality. The afternoon wore on. Maddie served, smiled, and disappeared into the background of people's important days. She overheard snippets of conversations about vacation homes, boarding schools, and investment opportunities. Once she'd served a famous pianist whose recordings she'd studied religiously, but she'd said nothing as she poured his wine. What would be the point? "You can take your break now," Paolo said around 2:30 p.m. when the restaurant had quieted. 15 minutes, not a second more. Maddie slipped out the back door into the alley where staff often gathered to smoke or check their phones. Instead, she pulled out a worn music theory book from her bag. She'd been teaching herself, continuing her education in whatever scraps of time she could find. Her fingers moved silently on her lap, practicing the difficult passage from Rachmaninoff that had been giving her trouble all week. "What are you doing?" asked Tina, another server who had stepped out for a cigarette. "Just reading," Maddie replied, quickly closing the book. "You're weird, you know that?" Tina said, though not unkindly. "Every break you're out here with your nose in some book instead of relaxing." Maddie just smiled. How could she explain that this wasn't just reading, it was survival? When her break ended, she returned to find the restaurant preparing for a private event that evening. The staff was buzzing with excitement. Apparently, a famous conductor was hosting a dinner for donors to the Philharmonic. "They're bringing in a pianist for background music," Tina whispered as they folded napkins. "Some hotshot from Europe." The piano was delivered this morning. Maddie had noticed the gleaming grand piano positioned near the windows, but had forced herself not to look at it directly. The sight of such a beautiful instrument, one that would cost her 10 years of tips to afford, was too painful. "You'll be staying to help serve," Paolo informed her. "Double pay plus tips. I assume that works for you?" It wasn't really a question. Maddie needed the money and Paolo knew it. She would have to call the community center and tell them she wouldn't make it tonight. The thought made her stomach tighten with anxiety. Missing practice felt like losing a piece of herself. When her regular shift ended, she helped transform the restaurant for the evening event. White roses appeared on every table. The lighting was adjusted to a warm glow. Crystal glasses sparkled under chandeliers. Maddie changed into the formal black dress reserved for special events and pulled her hair into a more elegant style. As the kitchen prepared elaborate dishes and the bar stocked rare wines, Maddie found herself alone in the dining room for a moment. The piano sat there, lid open, waiting. She glanced around. No one was watching. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them. Just one touch, she told herself. Just to feel what a proper instrument was like after so long. Maddie sat at the bench, not playing, just hovering her fingers over the keys. She closed her eyes and imagined pressing down, hearing the perfect tone that would respond to her touch. A real piano, not the worn-out community center instrument with its sticky keys and flat notes. "What do you think you're doing?" Paolo's sharp voice made her jump up from the bench as if it had burned her. "I'm sorry, I was just... Get back to work. If anyone saw you touching that, I'd be in trouble. That piano is worth more than you'll make in 10 years. She nodded, face burning with shame as she hurried back to her duties. The moment had been foolish, a childish indulgence that could have cost her the job she desperately needed. As evening fell, guests began to arrive in formal attire. Maddie recognized some faces from newspapers and magazines, wealthy patrons of the arts, corporate sponsors, old money families whose names appeared on buildings throughout the city. They air-kissed and complimented each other's jewelry while she offered trays of champagne. The conductor arrived to applause, a tall man with silver hair and an air of authority that commanded the room. Maddie had seen him perform once, years ago, when her music teacher had managed to get discounted student tickets to the Philharmonic. He had made the orchestra sound like one living, breathing entity. She'd never forgotten it. "The pianist is running late," she overheard one of the event planners telling Paolo. "Traffic from the airport. He should be here within the hour." Maddie continued serving, moving silently between conversations about fundraising goals and upcoming seasons. She kept her eyes away from the piano, focusing instead on keeping glasses filled and plates cleared. This wasn't her world anymore. It never really had been. As she carried a tray of empty glasses back to the kitchen, she passed her reflection in a mirror. For a moment, she hardly recognized herself. The poised server in black, hair perfectly in place, expression pleasantly neutral. Where was the girl who had once played with such passion that her Juilliard audition judges had given her a standing ovation? She was still there, Maddie reminded herself, still practicing every day in that small room at the community center, still playing for her mother on the electronic keyboard they'd managed to buy secondhand, still dreaming, even if the dream looked different now. The night continued and Maddie kept moving, kept smiling, kept serving. Tomorrow would be the same, and the day after that. But at night, when her shift ended, she would return to her music. And in those moments, fingers flying over keys, mind lost in melodies, she was free. In those moments, she wasn't just surviving. She was alive. What none of these wealthy patrons could possibly know was that the woman pouring their wine had once been called a prodigy. That beneath her server's uniform beat the heart of an artist. That while they discussed supporting young talent with their checkbooks, real talent was standing right beside them, invisible in plain sight. But soon, very soon, they would know, because life has a way of revealing what's hidden when you least expect it. The evening at Bellini's continued in full swing, the private room now filled with laughter and the clink of expensive crystal. Maddie moved efficiently between tables, her black shoes silent on the plush carpet as she refilled water glasses and cleared small plates. The famous conductor, Mr. Harlow, sat at the center table surrounded by his most important donors, his hands animated as he described his vision for the upcoming season. "Where is this pianist of yours, Edward?" asked an older woman draped in pearls. "I was looking forward to some Chopin with my dessert." The conductor checked his watch with a frown. His flight from Vienna was delayed. "I just received a message that he's still stuck in traffic from the airport." Paolo, hovering nearby, looked increasingly anxious. Maddie could read the worry on his face. A special event like this needed to be perfect, and the missing entertainment was a glaring hole in the evening's carefully planned program. "Perhaps we should move to the speeches while we wait," suggested one of the event coordinators, a woman with a clipboard who hadn't stopped moving since guests arrived. The conductor shook his head. "We planned the music first for a reason. I want them relaxed and inspired before we ask them to open their checkbooks." He lowered his voice, but Maddie caught his words as she collected his empty cocktail glass. "Some of these people won't donate a penny unless they're in the right mood." Maddie slipped away toward the kitchen, balancing a tray of empty glasses. As she pushed through the swinging door, she found the kitchen in controlled chaos. The executive chef was plating desserts with surgical precision, while line cooks moved around him like planets orbiting a sun. Paolo burst through the door behind her, phone pressed to his ear. "What do you mean he's not coming at all?" His face had gone from worried to ashen. "A migraine? Can't someone else from the conservatory?" He listened for a moment, then ended the call with a muttered curse. "Problem?" asked the chef without looking up from his meticulous placement of raspberry coulis. The pianist canceled. Apparently the flight and traffic were too much, and now he has a migraine that's left him unable to perform at the level these distinguished guests deserve. Paolo's impression of a snooty accent would have been funny in any other circumstance. "Can't you just play recorded music?" the chef suggested. "At an event for the Philharmonic? With the maestro himself hosting?" Paolo ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disrupting it for the first time since Maddie had known him. "These people didn't pay $500 a plate to listen to a Spotify playlist." Maddie continued unloading her tray, trying to make herself invisible as usual. But something was tugging at her, a wild, impossible idea that made her heart race. The grand piano sitting out there waiting, her fingers which hadn't touched a proper instrument in years, the opportunity that would never come again. She started, then stopped when Paolo didn't even glance her way. "I need to tell Mr. Harlow," Paolo continued, straightening his tie. "Maybe he can extend his speech, talk more about the upcoming season." "I can play," Maddie said louder this time. Several kitchen staff members turned to look at her. Paolo finally noticed her standing there, still holding an empty champagne flute. "What did you say?" he asked, his tone suggesting she'd spoken in a foreign language. Maddie took a deep breath. "I can play the piano. I studied at Juilliard before I had to drop out." The silence in the kitchen was sudden and complete. Even the chef paused in his plating to look up at her. Paolo's laugh was short and dismissive. "Very funny, Romano. Get back to work. I'm serious." Her voice was stronger now, fueled by 6 years of regret and missed opportunities. "I was on scholarship. I had to leave when my mother got sick. You expect me to believe that one of my servers is secretly a Juilliard-level pianist?" Paolo's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. The chef, who had always been kinder to the staff than Paolo, studied her face. "You know Chopin, Debussy? The classics these folks would expect?" Maddie nodded. "I practice every day at the community center. I keep up with it." "This is insane," Paolo muttered. "We're talking about some of the wealthiest arts patrons in New York. The director of the Metropolitan Opera is out there. The chairman of the New York Philharmonic. And they currently have no music for their very expensive dinner," the chef pointed out, returning to his desserts. "What's the harm in letting her try? If she's terrible, you can stop her after one song and blame the regular pianist's cancellation." Paolo looked at Maddie with new eyes, assessing her as if seeing her for the first time. "If you embarrass this restaurant, I won't," she said with quiet confidence. It was the same confidence that had gotten her through her Juilliard audition, despite wearing a second-hand dress and shoes held together with duct tape. "I promise." After a long moment, Paolo nodded sharply. "One song. If it's not up to standard, I'll make some excuse and you'll return to serving immediately." He checked his watch. "Dessert goes out in 5 minutes. Be ready." As he pushed back through the door to inform Mr. Harlow of the change in plans, Maddie stood frozen. What had she just done? After years of hiding her past of being invisible, she had volunteered to put herself at the center of attention in front of the exact people who populated the world she'd been forced to abandon. "You okay, honey?" asked Gloria, one of the older servers who had taken Maddie under her wing when she first started. "You look like you've seen a ghost. I just volunteered to play the piano for the Philharmonic dinner." Gloria's eyes widened. "You play piano? Since when?" "Since I was 4, Maddie replied with a small smile. "It's a long story." "Well, you better get out there and warm up those fingers," Gloria said, giving her shoulder a squeeze. "And don't you worry about your tables. I'll cover them." Maddie nodded gratefully and made her way back to the dining room. Paolo was speaking quietly to the conductor, who looked skeptical but interested. As she approached, she caught the end of their conversation. "Says she studied at Juilliard. I've never heard her play a note, but given the circumstances." Mr. Harlow turned to look at her, his expert eyes taking in everything from her server's uniform to her slightly trembling hands. "You're offering to step in for our pianist?" "Yes, sir," Maddie replied, meeting his gaze directly. "What would you play for us?" The question was a test, and she knew it. She thought quickly, considering the audience. "I would begin with Debussy's Clair de Lune to set the mood during dessert," she said. "Then perhaps Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, which I believe matches the intimate atmosphere you've created here. I could follow with something more dynamic, Liszt's Liebestraum perhaps, as people begin to mingle." Something shifted in the conductor's expression. Surprise, followed by curiosity. He nodded slowly. "That shows good programming instinct." He gestured to the piano. "Show me what you can do." Heart-pounding, Maddie walked across the room toward the grand piano. She could feel eyes turning to watch her, the wealthy patrons wondering why a server was approaching the instrument, her fellow staff members pausing in their duties. The bench was cool beneath her as she sat down. The keys gleamed like perfect teeth in a smile that was both welcoming and intimidating. She placed her hands on the keyboard, noting how the smooth ivory felt nothing like the worn keys at the community center. A hush fell over the nearest tables as people noticed something unusual was happening. Maddie closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Then, with a silent apology to her aching feet, she removed her too tight shoes to better feel the pedals. The first notes of Clair de Lune floated into the air, delicate as moonlight on water. The piano responded to her touch with a richness of tone that nearly made her gasp. It had been so long since she'd played an instrument of this quality, like trading in a bicycle for a Ferrari. She kept her eyes on the keys, afraid to look up and see judgment on the faces of people who attended Lincoln Center performances and had season tickets to Carnegie Hall. Instead, she poured everything into the music, her daily struggles, her mother's courage, her dreams deferred but never abandoned. As the final notes of the opening piece faded, Maddie finally risked glancing up. The room had fallen completely silent. Mr. Harlow stood nearby, his expression unreadable. Had she played well enough? Was she about to be dismissed back to her serving duties with a patronizing pat on the head? Then she noticed something strange. Several guests had stopped eating entirely, forks suspended halfway to mouths. Others had turned their chairs to face the piano directly. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to stand at the edges of the room. The conductor moved closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "The Chopin next, I think. And don't stop until I tell you to." Relief flooded through her as she positioned her hands again. This time she allowed herself to look out at the room as she played, connecting with her unexpected audience. A woman at a nearby table dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. An older gentleman had closed his eyes, swaying slightly with the music. Paolo stood near the entrance, his jaw slack with amazement. She caught his eye and gave him a small nod of thanks for taking the chance on her. He returned it with a gesture that clearly meant, "Keep going." As she transitioned from the Chopin to the more passionate Liszt piece, Maddie felt something unlock inside her, a door she had kept tightly shut for years. Playing like this, being heard and seen for her true talent, was like breathing pure oxygen after years of shallow breaths. The final chords of Liebestraum resonated through the room, lingering in the air like a shared secret between Maddie and every person present. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, there was a moment of absolute stillness. the kind of silence that follows something unexpected and genuine. Then the applause began. Not polite society applause, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation that grew until it filled the room. Maddie remained seated at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. This wasn't just approval, it was recognition. Mr. Harlow stepped forward, effectively silencing the room with his presence alone. He looked at Maddie with new eyes, the way he might look at a promising new talent auditioning for his orchestra. "I believe," he said to the room at large, "that we've been fortunate enough to witness something quite extraordinary tonight." He turned to Maddie. "Would you honor us with more?" As she positioned her hands to continue playing, Maddie caught a glimpse of her reflection in the piano's polished surface. She was still wearing her server's uniform, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time in 6 years, she was being seen for who she truly was. The evening that had started as just another shift had somehow transformed into something else entirely. An unexpected door opening to possibilities she had long ago forced herself to stop imagining. The room had transformed. What began as a formal fundraising dinner for the Philharmonic had become something else entirely. An intimate concert where the line between server and artist had blurred beyond recognition. Maddie's fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence as she played piece after piece. Each one met with increasingly enthusiastic applause. Mr. Harlow stood nearby, occasionally suggesting a particular composition, but mostly watching with keen interest. His expert ear caught every nuance, every choice she made in tempo and dynamics. He wasn't just listening to her technical ability, he was assessing her musicality, her instincts, her soul. "Play something modern," he suggested during a brief pause. "Show us your range." Maddie nodded, thinking quickly. She shifted into a Gershwin prelude, letting the jazz-influenced classical piece fill the room with its distinctive American sound. Several guests nodded appreciatively at the change in style. A man in a perfectly tailored suit whispered to his companion, who smiled and tapped her finger against her wine glass in time with the music. As she played, Maddie became aware of movement around her. The serving staff continued their duties, but with a new awareness of her presence. Gloria gave her an encouraging wink as she passed by with a tray of coffee cups. Even Paolo seemed transformed, his usual stern expression replaced by something like pride, as he directed the staff with subtle gestures. Careful not to disrupt the music. The dessert course had long since been cleared, but no one seemed eager to leave. The speech about donations that was supposed to follow the music had been temporarily forgotten, as Mr. Harlow himself pulled up a chair near the piano, completely absorbed in Maddie's performance. After finishing the Gershwin, Maddie paused, flexing her fingers. It had been years since she'd played for this long without a break. The community center piano was often available for only an hour at a time, with others waiting their turn. But she wasn't tired, quite the opposite. Every cell in her body felt alive, vibrating with the joy of finally doing what she was meant to do. "Do you know any Rachmaninoff?" asked Mr. Harlow. "His Piano Concerto No. 2 is featured in our upcoming season." Maddie smiled. "The second movement is one of my favorites." She began the piece, which was considerably more challenging than what she'd played so far. Her years of dedicated practice, even on an inferior instrument, had kept her technique sharp. Her hands stretched to reach the wide intervals, her fingers finding the complex harmonies with precision. As she played, she caught sight of a woman at a nearby table dabbing tears from her eyes. The music had that effect on people. Rachmaninoff's melodies could reach into your chest and squeeze your heart, especially when played with the kind of emotional intelligence that had once made Maddie's professors take notice. Halfway through the movement, Maddie closed her eyes, letting muscle memory guide her fingers. In her mind, she was no longer in Bellini's restaurant, but back in the practice rooms at Juilliard, preparing for a recital that never happened. The thought didn't bring the usual ache of regret. Instead, it felt like reclaiming a part of herself that had been set aside but never truly lost. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed that the crowd had grown. Kitchen staff had emerged to listen, standing against the wall with folded arms and impressed expressions. Even the dishwashers had peeked out from the back, drawn by sounds so different from the usual clatter of plates and murmur of conversations. As the piece built toward its climax, Maddie leaned into the music, her body swaying slightly with the crescendo. A strand of hair fell loose from her careful updo, but she didn't care anymore about maintaining the perfect server appearance. She was a musician now, and musicians were allowed to be moved by their own playing. The final chords resonated through the room, hanging in the air for a breathless moment before the applause began. Not the polite, society applause of earlier, but the genuine, enthusiastic response of people who had been genuinely touched. Mr. Harlow leaned forward. "Your technique is remarkable, especially for someone who hasn't had formal training in years. Where did you study before Juilliard?" "I didn't," Maddie replied honestly. "My mother cleaned offices at night, including a small music school. The director let me use the practice room sometimes when no one else was there. I mostly taught myself until high school, when my music teacher helped me prepare for Juilliard auditions." His eyebrows rose. "Self-taught? Until high school?" He shook his head slightly. Even more impressive. A well-dressed woman approached the piano, her jewelry catching the light as she moved. "I don't mean to interrupt," she said, though her tone suggested she was quite accustomed to interrupting whenever she pleased. "But I'm curious. Do you compose as well as perform?" The question caught Maddie off guard. Composition had been her secret passion at Juilliard, though she'd only taken introductory courses before having to leave. "I do," she answered cautiously. "Nothing that would interest—" "Play something of yours," Mr. Harlow cut in. It wasn't a request, but a gentle command. Maddie hesitated. Her compositions were private, personal, written during late nights at the community center when no one else was around to hear her experimental harmonies and emotional melodies. "Please," added the woman. "I'm on the board of the New York Composers Guild. We're always looking for fresh voices." The room had gone quiet again, waiting. Maddie took a deep breath, centering herself. Of all her compositions, there was one that meant the most. A piece she had written during her mother's treatments, during those long hours in hospital waiting rooms with nothing but fear and hope for company. "This is called Waiting for Morning," she said softly. "I wrote it for my mother." The opening notes were delicate, hesitant, like first light breaking over the horizon. The melody was simple enough that it felt familiar even on first hearing, but the harmonies beneath were complex, shifting between hope and uncertainty. As the piece progressed, the music grew stronger, more resolved, building toward a middle section that pulsed with determination. Maddie lost herself in the playing, forgetting the audience entirely. This wasn't about impressing anyone anymore. This was about sharing something true. The piece moved through its emotions like a story. Fear giving way to determination, pain transforming into acceptance, and finally, a cautious return to joy. When the final notes faded, there was no immediate applause. Instead, a profound silence filled the room, the kind that follows something unexpected and genuine. Maddie kept her head bowed, suddenly feeling exposed. This piece wasn't just music. It was her heart laid bare for a room full of strangers. Finally, Mr. Harlow spoke, his voice unusually soft. "That was extraordinary." The woman from the Composers Guild nodded in agreement. "There's something very honest about your writing. No pretension, no showing off, just genuine emotion translated into sound." She reached into her purse and withdrew a business card. "We should talk." Before Maddie could respond, a loud clearing of throat interrupted. The event coordinator stood at the center of the room, clipboard still in hand, looking slightly frantic about the evening's derailed schedule. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "while this unexpected musical interlude has been truly remarkable, Mr. Harlow had planned to speak about the upcoming season and the funding needs of our beloved Philharmonic." There were a few murmurs of acknowledgement as reality crept back into the room. The spell wasn't broken exactly, but the practical world was reasserting itself. Mr. Harlow stood, straightening his jacket as he prepared to address his guests. But before moving to the center of the room, he turned to Maddie. "We're not finished," he said quietly. "Play something light while I speak, then we'll talk." As he moved away, Maddie transitioned to a gentle background piece, something that would complement rather than compete with his speech. Her mind was spinning. The Composers Guild? Mr. Harlow wanting to talk afterward? It seemed impossible, like a dream she would wake from at any moment to find herself back in her normal life. Paolo appeared at her side, bending down to whisper, "You've been playing for over an hour. Do you need water? A break?" The concern in his voice was new. She was no longer just staff to him. She nodded gratefully, and he personally brought her a glass of water, something he'd never done for any server in the history of Bellini's. As she sipped the water, she watched Mr. Harlow speaking passionately about music education programs and community outreach. The guests were attentive, but many kept glancing back at her as if she were now a part of the evening's main attraction, rather than just the entertainment. Gloria passed by, giving her shoulder a quick squeeze. "Your mom would be so proud," she whispered before continuing her duties. The thought of her mother brought a lump to Maddie's throat. How many times had she promised that someday, somehow her music would make a difference? How many times had her mother told her to keep practicing, keep believing even when they couldn't afford proper lessons or a decent instrument? "Tonight is about supporting excellence in music," Mr. Harlow was saying. "About recognizing talent and nurturing it for the benefit of our community and our culture." As he spoke, his eyes met Maddie's briefly across the room. There was a message in that glance, a recognition, a promise. Something important had changed tonight. Not just for the wealthy donors considering their contributions, but for the waitress who had stepped out of the shadows and into her true self. Maddie's fingers continued to move across the keys, providing the perfect soundtrack to a moment that felt like the turning point in her own story. Whatever happened next, whether this was just one magical evening or the beginning of something more, she had reclaimed a part of herself that she feared had been lost forever. And that, she realized as she played, was its own kind of victory. Mr. Harlow's speech concluded to enthusiastic applause, but everyone knew the real star of the evening had been the unexpected pianist. As the formal part of the event wound down, guests began to mingle, drinks in hand, many drifting toward the piano where Maddie continued to play soft background music. She had switched to lighter pieces now, some Gershwin, a bit of Billy Joel, even a tasteful arrangement of a popular song that had several guests nodding in recognition. Her versatility was another surprise, showing she wasn't just a classical performer but a well-rounded musician. "You've been holding out on us, Romano," said a voice beside her. Maddie looked up to find Paolo standing there, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to her with a gesture that seemed part apology, part celebration. "I don't usually drink during shifts," she said automatically. "I think we can agree this isn't a usual shift anymore." He placed the glass on top of the piano. "Besides, your serving duties are officially over for the night. You're now our featured entertainment." She smiled and nodded her thanks, continuing to play with one hand while taking a small sip with the other. The champagne was far better than anything she'd ever tasted, probably worth half a day's wages for a single glass. "How long?" Paolo asked quietly. "How long what? How long have you been playing like this?" He gestured vaguely at her hands at the piano at the room full of impressed guests. "Since I was 4, she replied. "But I haven't played on an instrument this nice in years." Paolo shook his head slightly. 6 years you've worked here." 6 years of yes, sir. Right away, sir, and I never had a clue." He paused. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" The question caught her off guard. Why hadn't she? Pride, perhaps, or the fear that mentioning her past would only highlight how far she'd fallen from her dreams. "It wasn't relevant to carrying plates," she said finally. Before Paolo could respond, Mr. Harlow approached, accompanied by an elegant older woman wearing a striking red dress and a thoughtful expression. "Don't stop playing," Mr. Harlow said to Maddie. "But I wanted to introduce Dr. Eleanor Walsh, Dean of Music at Manhattan Conservatory." Maddie nearly missed a note. Manhattan Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. She nodded respectfully, continuing to play a gentle jazz standard. "Your performance tonight was quite remarkable," Dr. Walsh said, her voice warm but evaluating. "Edward tells me you were at Juilliard before circumstances intervened." "Yes, ma'am. For 1 year. And since then, I practice when I can, at a community center near my apartment." Dr. Walsh raised an eyebrow. "Community center pianos aren't known for their quality." "No, ma'am. But it's better than not playing at all." The dean smiled at that. "A true musician's answer." She glanced at Mr. Harlow, some unspoken communication passing between them. "We should talk about your future, Ms. Romano. I have a strong feeling it involves something more than carrying dinner plates, as well as you've done it." Paolo, still standing nearby, nodded vigorously. "She's wasted on us, to be honest. Best server we have, but he gestured at the piano. Where did you study before Juilliard? Dr. Walsh asked. I didn't have formal training until high school, Maddie explained, continuing to play softly. My mother cleaned offices at night, including a small music school. The director sometimes let me use the practice rooms when no one was there. Dr. Walsh's eyebrows rose. Self-taught, mostly, until my high school music teacher helped me prepare for Juilliard auditions. Remarkable, the dean murmured, exchanging another glance with Mr. Harlow. And you compose as well? That piece about your mother was quite moving. Thank you, Maddie said. Composition was always special to me. At Juilliard, I was hoping to double major in performance and composition before she trailed off, not wanting to burden these important people with her personal struggles. Before life intervened, Dr. Walsh finished for her. It happens to many promising artists. The true test is what you do afterward. She studied Maddie thoughtfully. You didn't give up. Even serving tables you kept playing, kept composing? I had to, Maddie said simply. It was the truth. Music wasn't something she did. It was who she was. More guests were gathering around now, listening to the conversation as much as to the music. Maddie felt a flutter of nerves but kept playing, her fingers finding the familiar patterns even as her mind raced with the surreal turn her evening had taken. A tall man in an impeccably tailored suit approached, cocktail in hand. Excuse the interruption, he said, but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Richard Bennett, from the Westside Arts Foundation. We provide scholarships for promising artists facing financial hardship. He pulled out a business card and placed it atop the piano. We should talk about your situation, Ms. Romano. Before Maddie could respond, another guest stepped forward, the woman from the New York Composers Guild who had spoken to her earlier. I've been thinking about your composition, she said. It has commercial potential beyond classical circles. Have you considered film scoring? I have contacts in that industry who are always looking for fresh talent. Maddie's hands faltered on the keys for the first time that evening. Film scoring? Scholarships? Conversations with the Dean of Manhattan Conservatory? It was too much to process, like being caught in a dream where everything you ever wanted suddenly appears all at once. I don't know what to say, she managed, her voice barely audible over the piano. Say nothing right now, Mr. Harlow advised kindly. Just keep playing. We can discuss details later. Grateful for the direction, Maddie nodded and focused on the music, letting her fingers speak for her while she tried to calm her racing thoughts. She transitioned into Debussy again, the flowing, impressionistic piece creating a momentary bubble of calm around her. As she played, she noticed a commotion near the entrance to the private dining room.
Gloria was there, gesturing excitedly to someone just outside.
A moment later, she hurried over to the piano, her face flushed with excitement. Maddie, she whispered urgently, your mother's here. What? Maddie nearly stopped playing altogether. How? I called her after you started playing, Gloria admitted. Told her she needed to come right away, that something amazing was happening. She took a cab. She's right outside. Emotions flooded through Maddie, joy, nervousness, and a sudden, overwhelming desire to share this moment with the woman who had sacrificed everything for her. Without thinking, she stood up from the piano, the music cutting off mid-phrase. I'm sorry, she said to the gathered crowd. My mother, she's here. Could I? Of course, Mr. Harlow said immediately. Bring her in. Maddie hurried to the entrance where her mother stood hesitantly, looking out of place in her simple dress among the wealthy patrons. Though the years of illness had taken their toll, leaving her thinner and grayer than she should have been at 50, her eyes were bright with curiosity and concern. Mama, Maddie said, embracing her. I can't believe you're here. Your friend called, said I had to come right away. Is everything okay? Are you in trouble? Her mother's accent became more pronounced when she was worried. No, Mama, everything's wonderful. Come with me. Taking her mother's hand, Maddie led her into the room where the guests parted respectfully. She guided her mother to the piano and sat her down on the bench. These people, Maddie explained softly. They heard me play tonight. The regular pianist canceled and I filled in. Her mother's eyes widened as she took in the elegant room, the well-dressed guests, and finally, the magnificent grand piano. You played for them on this? Maddie nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. And Mama, this is Mr. Harlow, conductor of the New York Philharmonic, and Dr. Walsh, dean of Manhattan Conservatory. They want to talk to me about my future." Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. For years, she had watched her daughter put her dreams aside, had felt the weight of guilt despite Maddie's insistence that the choice had been hers to make. Now seeing these distinguished people gathered around her daughter, recognition and respect in their eyes was almost too much to bear. "Play for me," she whispered to Maddie. "Play for me on this beautiful piano." Maddie sat beside her mother on the bench, positioning her hands over the keys. Without hesitation, she began to play the piece she had written during her mother's illness, Waiting for Morning, the composition that had moved the room to silence earlier. This time, with her mother beside her, the piece took on new meaning. Every note was a shared memory. The long nights in hospital rooms, the small victories in recovery, the moments of fear and the moments of hope. As she played, Maddie felt her mother's shoulders begin to shake with quiet sobs of joy and pride. When the piece ended, Maddie put her arm around her mother, who whispered in her native language, "I always knew this day would come, always." There wasn't a dry eye in the immediate vicinity. Even Paolo was blinking rapidly, pretending to be very interested in straightening his already perfect tie. Mr. Harlow stepped forward again. "Ms. Romano, we would be honored if you would continue playing for us tonight. But first," he gestured to a nearby server, who hurried forward with a chair. "Perhaps your mother would be more comfortable here, where she can watch you properly." As her mother moved to the offered seat, she squeezed Maddie's hand tightly. "Show them everything," she whispered. "Show them who you really are." With renewed confidence, Maddie turned back to the piano. The room settled once more as she began to play again, this time choosing a triumphant piece that matched the soaring feeling in her heart. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music, introductions, and possibilities. Business cards accumulated atop the piano. Promises of meetings, auditions, and opportunities were made. Wealthy patrons who had barely noticed Maddie while she served their meals now listened intently to her every word about her musical journey. By the time the last guest departed, Maddie's mother was deep in conversation with Dr. Walsh about potential scholarship opportunities, while Mr. Harlow and the woman from the Composers Guild discussed the possibility of featuring one of Maddie's compositions in an upcoming program. Paolo approached as Maddie finally stepped away from the piano, flexing her fingers after hours of playing. "So," he said with a wry smile, "I'm guessing you won't be available for the breakfast shift tomorrow?" Maddie laughed, a free, joyful sound that she hadn't made in years. "I think I might need to request some time off." "Take all the time you need," he replied, suddenly serious. "Your place will be waiting if things don't work out, but something tells me they will." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I didn't see who you really were all this time." "It's okay," she said. "I think I needed to remember who I really was, too." As Maddie gathered her things and prepared to leave with her mother, she looked back at the piano, gleaming under the soft lights, lid still raised like a wing ready for flight. Just hours ago, it had been an untouchable symbol of a world she'd lost. Now it had become a bridge back to herself, to possibilities she had forced herself to stop imagining. She wasn't naive enough to think everything would be easy from here. There would be challenges ahead, practical concerns to address. But something fundamental had changed tonight. She had been seen, truly seen, not as a server, not as a background figure, but as the artist she had always been. And that recognition, she knew, was just the beginning. 3 months after that fateful night at Bellini's, Maddie stood backstage at Lincoln Center, peeking through the curtain at the rapidly filling auditorium. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down the front of her new dress, a simple but elegant black gown that felt worlds away from the server's uniform she'd worn for so many years. "Nervous?" asked Mr. Harlow, appearing beside her. In the weeks since discovering her talent, he had become something of a mentor, helping navigate the complicated world of professional music that she'd been absent from for so long. "Terrified," she admitted with a small laugh. "I've never played for this many people before." The auditorium held over 2,000 seats, and tonight was nearly full, a special showcase of emerging talent sponsored by the West Side Arts Foundation. Richard Bennett had kept his word, arranging not only a scholarship for Maddie but also a spot in tonight's performance. "You've played this program flawlessly in rehearsal," Mr. Harlow reminded her. Just pretend you're back at the community center playing for yourself. Maddie nodded, taking a deep breath. So much had changed in such a short time. The morning after her impromptu performance at Bellini's, her phone had begun ringing with calls from people who had been at the dinner. By the end of that week, she had auditioned for Dr. Walsh at Manhattan Conservatory and been offered a special placement program for exceptional mature students the Composers Guild had arranged for one of her pieces to be professionally recorded, and Mr. Harlow had introduced her to several musicians from the Philharmonic who were now mentoring her. Even Paolo had surprised her, arranging a flexible schedule at the restaurant that allowed her to continue earning money while pursuing these new opportunities. 5 minutes. Ms. Romano, called a stagehand, clipboard in hand. Your mother's in the front row, Mr. Harlow mentioned. I made sure of it. Tears pricked at Maddie's eyes. Her mother's health had improved dramatically in recent months, partly due to the medical assistance program that Richard Bennett had connected them with, but also, Maddie suspected, from the renewed hope and purpose they both felt. I still can't believe this is happening, she whispered. Believe it, Mr. Harlow said firmly. This isn't charity or luck, Maddie. This is recognition of genuine talent that persevered against the odds. You earned this moment. A gentle knock interrupted them. Maddie turned to find Gloria standing there holding a small bouquet of flowers. I couldn't miss your big night, she said, handing Maddie the flowers. The whole staff wanted to come, but someone had to keep the restaurant running. She winked. Paolo's covering my section so I could be here. Maddie hugged her friend tightly. I wouldn't be here without you. You're the one who called my mother that night. I knew she needed to see it, Gloria said simply. Some moments are too important to miss. Another call came for the performers to take their places. Gloria squeezed Maddie's hand once more before hurrying to find her seat. Mr. Harlow gave a final nod of encouragement and moved toward the conductor's entrance. Left alone for a moment, Maddie closed her eyes, centering herself. She thought of the community center piano with its sticky keys and uneven tone. She thought of the late nights practicing after double shifts, her feet aching but her spirit determined. She thought of her mother falling asleep in a chair beside her as she played, wanting to support her daughter's dream even when exhausted from her own long workday. All of it had led to this moment. When she opened her eyes again, she was ready. Not just ready to perform, but ready to step fully into this new chapter of her life, the one she had never stopped believing might someday arrive. The program began with performances from other talented musicians, students, from Juilliard and Manhattan Conservatory, young professionals at the start of promising careers. Maddie watched from the wings, no longer feeling like an imposter among them but like a peer with her own unique journey. Finally, it was her turn. As she walked onto the stage, the lights momentarily blinded her. She couldn't see the audience, couldn't see her mother's proud face or Mr. Harlow's encouraging nod. All she could see was the magnificent grand piano waiting at center stage, its lid raised like a great black wing. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The audience faded away. The years of struggle faded away. There was only Maddie and the music waiting to be released into the world. She began with Chopin, the piece she had played that night at Bellini's when her life had changed. Her fingers found the familiar patterns with confidence now, no longer worried about making a mistake or being judged. This was her language, her truth. As she moved through her program, transitioning from classical pieces to her own compositions, Maddie felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete alignment with her purpose. This was what she had been born to do, not just to play notes on a page, but to communicate emotion through sound, to connect with others at a level deeper than words could reach. For her final piece, she had chosen her composition Waiting for Morning, the one she had written during her mother's illness. But in the weeks since the night at Bellini's, she had expanded it, adding a triumphant final movement that spoke of sunrise after the longest night, of hope fulfilled after years of patient waiting. As the final notes resonated through the hall, there was a moment of complete silence, that special hush that comes when an audience has been truly moved. Then applause erupted, building until people began to stand. A standing ovation at Lincoln Center for the woman who 3 months ago had been invisibly serving dinner to these same people. Maddie rose from the bench, bowing deeply as flowers were brought to the stage. Through the stage lights, she could finally make out the front row, her mother standing with tears streaming down her face. Mr. Harlow applauding vigorously, Dr. Walsh smiling with satisfaction at a talent recognized and nurtured, and there, unexpectedly, was Paolo with several staff members from Bellini's, all of them on their feet, cheering for their former colleague. Even in her new gown on this prestigious stage, Maddie felt no embarrassment at their presence, only gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, including every table served and every dish carried. Backstage after the performance, well-wishers gathered around. Richard Bennett introduced her to potential sponsors. The woman from the Composers Guild brought a film director interested in her work for an upcoming project. Dr. Walsh discussed her progress in the special program at the conservatory. Through it all, Maddie kept one arm around her mother's shoulders, grounding herself in the presence of the woman who had made everything possible through her sacrifices and unwavering belief. "What do you think, Mama?" she asked quietly during a brief lull in the conversations. Her mother looked up at her, eyes bright with pride. "I think the struggle was worth it. All of it." Later that evening, after the reception had ended and most guests had departed, Maddie found herself drawn back to the now empty stage. The cleaning crew worked quietly in the background, but they gave her space when they saw her approach the piano once more. She sat down, not to perform, but simply to feel the keys beneath her fingers and reflect on the journey. From the community center's worn upright to Lincoln Center's concert grand, it seemed impossible, yet here she was. A voice spoke from the darkened auditorium. "Some people belong on this stage. It's as simple as that." Mr. Harlow emerged from the shadows, hands in his pockets as he approached. "I come here sometimes after performances," he explained. "There's something special about a concert hall when everyone has gone home. You can still feel the music in the air." Maddie nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I never thought I'd be here," she admitted. "Even when I was at Juilliard, Lincoln Center seemed like a distant dream. And yet here you are." He gestured around the magnificent space. "The question is, where do you go from here?" It was a good question, one with far more possibilities than she could have imagined just months ago. The conservatory program, composition opportunities, potential recording sessions, even teaching offers. Doors that had been firmly closed were now standing wide open. "I'm still working at Bellini's," she said with a small smile. "Just 2 shifts a week now. Paolo insists I play for the Sunday brunch crowd." Mr. Harlow raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to do that anymore. Your scholarship covers your basic expenses, and with the composition commissions coming in—" "I know," Maddie interrupted gently. "But I want to. Those people, that place, they're part of my story. I don't want to forget where I came from or how I got here." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Just don't let it hold you back from where you're going." "It won't," she promised. "But it reminds me of something important. That extraordinary talent can be found anywhere, even carrying plates in a restaurant. That circumstances don't define who we are or what we're capable of becoming." Mr. Harlow smiled at that. "A valuable lesson for us all." He checked his watch. "It's getting late. Can I offer you a ride home?" Maddie shook her head. "My mother's waiting for me. We're celebrating with ice cream just like we did when I got into Juilliard." She laughed softly. Some traditions are worth keeping. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, Maddie took one last look at the magnificent hall, the rows of seats where people had stood to applaud her, the stage where she had finally reclaimed her dream. Tomorrow she would return to her practice schedule, her classes, her growing list of commitments in this new life. She would face new challenges, new expectations, new pressures. The path ahead wouldn't always be easy. But as she walked through the grand lobby of Lincoln Center toward the exit where her mother waited, Maddie knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never again be invisible. She had been seen, truly seen, for exactly who she was. And that recognition had changed everything. Outside, the city lights sparkled against the night sky. Her mother waved from a bench near the fountain, a simple woman in a simple dress beaming with uncomplicated joy. "Ready for ice cream?" her mother called. Maddie smiled, quickening her steps. "Ready for everything," she replied.